The Tiger tank's periscope shattered as another Soviet shell slammed into the turret, sending glass fragments across Colonel Werner Hartmann's face. October 1943, 3 months after Kursk, and everything the Wehrmacht thought it knew about fighting Soviet armor had become obsolete. His battalion of Panthers and Tigers, machines that should have dominated any battlefield, were being systematically destroyed by T-34s using tactics that defied every principle of armored warfare the Germans had mastered. In the next 60 minutes, Hartmann would witness the death of German tank supremacy, not through superior Soviet vehicles, but through a revolution in tactical thinking that turned every German strength into a weakness. If you're fascinated by military evolution and the tactical innovations that changed history's greatest battles, subscribe to discover more untold stories of adaptation and survival. The morning had started with typical German precision. Hartmann's reinforced battalion, part of the reformed 2nd SS Panzer Division, had taken position outside Krivoy Rog, expecting conventional Soviet assault. Intelligence reported a Guards tank corps approaching, estimated at 80 T-34s, and supporting infantry. On paper, it should have been manageable. 24 Panthers and 12 Tigers, positioned in overlapping fields of fire, each capable of destroying T-34s at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. But the first sign something was different came with the Soviet reconnaissance. Instead of the usual probing attacks, small groups of T-34s appeared at extreme range, fired a few rounds, then vanished into dead ground before German guns could respond. They weren't trying to find German positions. They already knew them. Soviet artillery began falling with unprecedented accuracy, not the usual area barrage, but precise strikes on identified German tanks. Hartmann ordered displacement, but wherever they moved, the artillery followed within minutes. Then came the assault, and it was nothing like the mass charges that had characterized Soviet tactics since 1941. The T-34s moved in small groups, never more than 4 tanks together, using terrain with an expertise that shocked German veterans. They hugged every fold in the ground, every tree line, every depression that offered cover. More disturbingly, they were coordinating in ways the Germans couldn't understand. Groups would appear simultaneously from multiple directions, fire, then vanish before German turrets could traverse. Sergeant Major Otto Carius, commanding a Tiger, reported something that chilled Hartmann's blood. The Soviets were deliberately targeting specific components, not just trying to penetrate armor, but aiming for vision blocks, gun mantlets, track assemblies. His Tiger had taken 12 hits, none penetrating, but he was effectively blind and immobilized. The Soviets weren't trying to destroy his tank. They were mission-killing it, turning it into a 60-ton roadblock. The German response followed doctrine perfected in 3 years of Eastern Front combat. Panthers advanced to engage while Tigers provided overwatch. But the Soviet tanks refused to accept battle on German terms. They retreated just beyond effective range, drawing the Panthers forward, then struck from the flanks with tanks that seemed to appear from nowhere. German radio discipline, usually impeccable, dissolved into confusion as commanders reported threats from every direction. Captain Friedrich Becker's Panther Company stumbled into what could only be described as a tactical trap. Pursuing retreating T-34s, they entered a small valley only to find Soviet tanks positioned on both ridges, firing down into their thin top armor. But these weren't hastily positioned defenders. The Soviets had clearly rehearsed this maneuver, their timing perfect, their fire distribution coordinated. In 5 minutes, Becker lost 6 Panthers, not to superior firepower, but to superior tactical planning. The revelation came when Hartmann observed a damaged T-34 crew abandoning their vehicle. Instead of fleeing, they ran to specific positions and began directing other tanks using signal flags. These weren't just tank crews. They were part of an integrated system where every element supported every other. Dismounted tankers became forward observers. Infantry became tank hunters. Everyone operated as part of a larger organism that adapted instantly to changing conditions. Lieutenant Klaus Müller, a veteran of Kursk, voiced what everyone was thinking. At Kursk, the Soviets had fought bravely but predictably, relying on mass and courage. Now, 3 months later, they were fighting with a sophistication that matched or exceeded German tactical doctrine. It was as if they had compressed years of learning into weeks, analyzing every German tactic and developing specific counters. The Soviet use of combined arms was particularly devastating. As German tanks focused on the T-34s, Soviet infantry teams emerged from concealed positions with anti-tank rifles and satchel charges. When German infantry moved to counter, they were suppressed by mortars that seemed to know exactly where they would deploy. Every German reaction triggered a Soviet counterreaction that had been planned in advance. By midday, Hartmann's battalion had lost 8 Panthers and 3 Tigers, mostly to flank shots and mobility kills rather than frontal penetration. But the psychological impact was worse than the physical losses. German tank crews, accustomed to dominating through superior training and equipment, found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by an enemy they had dismissed as tactically inferior. The final shock came when Soviet tanks executed what could only be called a tactical withdrawal in contact. Instead of the usual chaotic retreat or suicidal last stands, they pulled back in coordinated bounds, each group covering the others, maintaining perfect spacing and fire discipline. They had achieved their objective, mauling the German battalion, and were preserving their force for the next engagement. It was textbook tactical excellence that any German Panzer officer would have admired if it weren't being used against them. That evening, Hartmann gathered the surviving commanders in a damaged farmhouse, serving as temporary headquarters. The mood was unlike anything he had experienced in 3 years of combat. These were men who had driven to the gates of Moscow, who had survived the winter of 1941, who had fought at Stalingrad and Kursk. They weren't easily shaken, yet every face showed the same bewildered recognition that something fundamental had changed in how the Soviets waged armored warfare. Captain Ernst Zimmermann, commander of the surviving Tiger Company, presented his analysis with characteristic precision. The Soviets were using what he called distributed tactics. Instead of concentrating force at a single point, they were creating multiple simultaneous threats that exceeded the German ability to respond. A Tiger might engage one T-34 platoon, only to be flanked by another that had been waiting specifically for that Tiger to commit. It was chess, not checkers, and the Soviets were thinking several moves ahead. The intelligence officer, Major Heinrich Volker, revealed intercepted Soviet radio communications that deepened the mystery. The tank units were using a completely new command structure. Instead of rigid hierarchical orders, junior commanders were making independent decisions within a broader tactical framework. They called it mission-type tactics, ironically similar to the German Auftragstaktik that had brought the Wehrmacht such success. But the Soviets had added their own innovations, creating a fluid command system that adapted faster than German doctrine allowed. Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Paper, arriving with reinforcements, brought disturbing news from other sectors. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across the entire front, German Panzer units were reporting similar experiences. Soviet armor was operating with new tactical sophistication, employing maneuvers that seemed to anticipate German responses. The mass wave attacks that had characterized Soviet doctrine since 1941 had vanished, replaced by calculated, professional armored warfare. The transformation source became clearer when a captured Soviet tank commander was interrogated. Major Pavel Rotmistrov, wounded and defiant, revealed that the Red Army had systematically analyzed every tank battle since Kursk. Special committees had interviewed hundreds of survivors, documented every successful tactic, and disseminated lessons through an intensive training program. Every Soviet tank crew had spent weeks studying German tactics, learning not just how to fight, but how Germans thought. More remarkably, Rotmistrov described simulation exercises where Soviet units practiced specific scenarios hundreds of times. They would recreate German defensive positions and practice attacking them from every angle until the maneuvers became automatic. They called it battle drill, turning complex tactical evolutions into reflexive responses. Where German excellence came from years of experience, the Soviets had industrialized tactical learning. The next morning brought another shock. Hartmann's repaired Panthers moved to intercept what appeared to be a standard Soviet probe. But the T-34s were accompanied by something new, Su-85 tank destroyers positioned in overwatch. When the Panthers engaged the T-34s, the Su-85s opened fire from concealed positions at ranges that matched German guns. The Soviets had learned from German Panzer tactics, creating their own tank destroyer doctrine overnight. Sergeant Wilhelm Nispel, credited with over 100 tank kills, found himself unable to achieve a single victory. Every time he acquired a target, Soviet tanks would disappear behind smoke screens deployed with perfect timing. When he displaced to gain a better angle, he would find Soviet infantry already positioned with anti-tank weapons. His experience, accumulated over 3 years of combat, was being nullified by Soviet tactical adaptation. The psychological warfare aspect was equally sophisticated. Soviet tanks would deliberately expose themselves briefly, drawing German fire that revealed positions. They would then withdraw while artillery, already registered on those coordinates, would devastate the German tanks. It was a trap that relied on German aggressiveness, using their own tactical superiority against them. By the third day of combat, Hartmann recognized patterns within patterns. The Soviets weren't just using new tactics, they were rotating them systematically. Morning attacks emphasized mobility. Afternoon engagements focused on firepower. Evening operations stressed concealment. They were preventing German units from adapting by constantly changing their approach, keeping a Wehrmacht perpetually off balance. The maintenance situation revealed another evolution. Destroyed T-34s were being recovered and repaired with extraordinary efficiency. Soviet recovery teams operated like Formula One pit crews, changing entire power packs in under an hour. Tanks the Germans considered killed were returning to battle within days. The Soviets had turned their supposed weakness, mechanical unreliability, into a strength through superior recovery and repair organization. Captain Mueller's Panther Company encountered the ultimate expression of evolved Soviet tactics when they engaged what they thought was a retreating tank battalion. The T-34s led them into a complex ambush involving tanks, assault guns, anti-tank guns, and infantry all operating in perfect synchronization. The Germans found themselves in a kill zone where every escape route had been anticipated and blocked. Mueller lost his entire company in 12 minutes, a destruction so complete that battalion headquarters initially refused to believe the reports. The wounded survivors described something that challenged German assumptions about Soviet capabilities. The enemy tanks had maneuvered with a coordination suggesting not just radio communication, but a shared understanding of tactical concepts. Tank commanders had made split-second decisions that complemented each other perfectly, as if operating from a common playbook that everyone had memorized. The crisis deepened when General Hermann Hoth himself arrived at the front to assess the situation. The architect of German armored doctrine, who had led Panzer Corps since Poland, found himself witnessing a form of tank warfare he didn't recognize. In a demonstration that would haunt German tactical thinking, a single Soviet tank brigade successfully defended against an attack by 2 German Panzer battalions, not through superior numbers or positions, but through tactical innovation that rendered German advantages meaningless. The Soviet commander, Colonel Mikhail Katakov, had positioned his forces in what he called a fire pocket system. Groups of 3 to 4 tanks occupied mutually supporting positions, creating interlocking fields of fire that covered all approaches. But unlike static defense, these pockets could shift, with tanks moving between prepared positions using concealed routes. German reconnaissance would identify and engage one pocket, only to find it empty when the attack commenced, while the tanks had relocated to strike from unexpected angles. Major Hans von Luck, observing through binoculars, documented something that challenged every assumption about Soviet capabilities. T-34 commanders were conducting reconnaissance by fire with calculated precision, using specific ammunition types to test German armor thickness at different ranges. They were gathering data during combat, adjusting their tactics in real time based on observed results. This wasn't the Red Army of 1941, fighting on courage alone. This was a professional force conducting operational research under fire. The technical evolution matched the tactical sophistication. Soviet tanks sported improvised modifications that showed deep understanding of German weaknesses. Additional armor plates were welded at specific angles to deflect the most common German shot trajectories. Vision blocks were protected by welded cages that prevented them from being destroyed by rifle fire. Track guards were reinforced to prevent the mobility kills that German gunners favored. Every modification addressed a specific German tactic. Lieutenant Peter Wolf's Tiger was destroyed in an engagement that exemplified the new Soviet approach. For T-34s engage him simultaneously, but instead of trying to penetrate his frontal armor, they conducted what could only be described as a surgical strike. One tank destroyed his periscope with sustained machine gun fire. Another damaged his tracks with rounds. The third created a smoke screen that isolated him from supporting German tanks. The fourth maneuvered for a killing shot on his rear armor. His Tiger, mechanically perfect and crewed by veterans, was methodically dissected by opponents who understood its every vulnerability. The interrogation of captured Soviet tankers revealed the depth of their tactical education. They could accurately describe the armor thickness of every German tank at different angles, the reload times of German guns, the blind spots in German vision systems. They knew that Panthers had weak final drive systems that failed under stress. They knew Tigers consumed massive amounts of fuel and targeted their supply vehicles. They had turned intelligence gathering into a science, with every crew contributing observations that were rapidly disseminated across all units. Colonel Hartmann attempted to adapt German tactics to counter Soviet evolution. He implemented rapid displacement drills, improved combined arms coordination, and emphasized flexibility over rigid defensive schemes. But every adaptation was met by Soviet counter-adaptation. When Germans increased displacement frequency, Soviets pre-registered artillery on likely alternative positions. When Germans improved infantry tank coordination, Soviets developed specific drills to separate and isolate the elements. The supply situation illustrated another dimension of Soviet advancement. Their logistics system, once chaotic and unreliable, now operated with clockwork precision. Ammunition and fuel arrived at the exact moment needed, distributed through a network of concealed dumps that German reconnaissance couldn't locate. Soviet tanks were conducting sustained operations for days, while German units, dependent on vulnerable supply columns, found themselves increasingly isolated and running short of ammunition. A captured Soviet document provided insight into their training revolution. The Red Army had established special tactical schools where successful tank commanders taught their methods to incoming units. Virtual battles were conducted on sand tables where commanders practiced against opponents using German tactics. Every possible scenario was rehearsed until responses became automatic. They had industrialized tactical excellence, mass-producing skilled commanders the way factories produce tanks. The night fighting capability particularly shocked German veterans. Soviet tanks equipped with primitive but effective infrared systems were conducting coordinated attacks in complete darkness. German tanks, relying on flares and moonlight, were engaged by enemies they couldn't see. The technological gap was modest. The Soviets were using captured German equipment and improved copies, but their tactical exploitation was masterful. They had learned to fight in a dimension where German expertise was worthless. Sergeant Major Klaus Becker, a veteran of over 200 tank engagements, made an observation that captured the transformation. The Soviets were no longer fighting German tanks. They were fighting German minds. Every action was designed to trigger a predictable German response that could then be exploited. They had studied German doctrine so thoroughly that they knew what a German commander would order before he gave the command. It was psychological warfare through tactical excellence. The cumulative effect on German morale was catastrophic. Tank crews who had considered themselves elite, inheritors of a tradition stretching back to Guderian and Rommel, found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by an enemy they had despised. The myth of German tactical superiority, carefully cultivated through years of victory, was crumbling under the weight of Soviet adaptation. Young replacement crews arrived at the front expected to dominate through superior training only to be destroyed in their first engagements by Soviets who had evolved beyond their instructors' understanding. By November 1943, the full implications of Soviet tactical evolution became undeniable when Operation Citadel's aftermath was analyzed at OKW headquarters. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, compiled reports from every Panzer division on the Eastern Front. The conclusion was stark and unanimous. The Red Army had not just learned German tactics, they had transcended them, creating a new form of armored warfare that made traditional Panzer doctrine obsolete. The teacher had been surpassed by the student in a transformation that took merely months. Colonel Hartmann's final battle before being wounded illustrated the complete reversal of tactical superiority. His reinforced battalion, now reduced to 15 operational tanks, faced a Soviet Guards tank corps near Zaporizhzhia. The Soviets executed what they called deep battle tactics, but with refinements that would have impressed even Tukhachevsky. They didn't seek decisive engagement, but instead conducted dozens of small actions, each degrading German capability incrementally. Death by 1,000 cuts, delivered with surgical precision. The Soviet commander, General Pavel Rybalko, had divided his force into battle groups that operated independently but toward a unified objective. Each group contained tanks, assault guns, infantry, and engineers, creating combined arms teams that could handle any situation. They moved in a flowing pattern that seemed chaotic, but was actually carefully orchestrated. German intelligence couldn't track the units because they constantly reformed, split, and merged like a liquid flowing around obstacles. Major Wilhelm Langkite, commanding the last intact Panther Company, experienced the evolution firsthand when his unit was destroyed without firing a shot. Soviet reconnaissance units had tracked them for days, documenting their procedures, timing their maintenance routines, mapping their defensive positions. The attack came during a crew rotation, precisely when German tanks were most vulnerable. Smoke shells blinded them, infantry teams destroyed tracks, and T-34s finished the immobilized Panthers from outside their gun traverse limits. It was execution, not combat. The technical intelligence recovered from knocked-out Soviet tanks revealed another dimension of their evolution. They had developed specific ammunition types for different German tanks. Tungsten core rounds for Tiger's flat surfaces, capped shells for Panther's sloped armor, rounds calibrated to damage specific external components. Their logistics system could deliver the exact ammunition type needed for expected opposition. They had turned tank combat into an industrial process, where the correct tool was always available for each task. Lieutenant Colonel von Manschufel, one of Germany's most innovative armor commanders, attempted to counter Soviet evolution with radical tactical changes. He dispersed his tanks in a cloud formation, emphasizing independent action over concentrated force. But the Soviets adapted within days, using their superior numbers to fix each isolated German tank, while maneuvering for killing shots. Every German innovation was absorbed, analyzed, and countered faster than new tactics could be developed. The human intelligence aspect proved equally sophisticated. Soviet units had detailed dossiers on German commanders, knowing their tactical preferences, their psychological profiles, their operational habits. When aggressive commanders faced Soviet forces, they encountered elastic defenses that absorb attacks while inflicting maximum casualties. When cautious commanders took charge, Soviets pressed relentlessly, exploiting every hesitation. They weren't just fighting formations, they were fighting individuals, with tactics tailored to each opponent's personality. Captain Ernst Barkmann's experience exemplified the psychological warfare component. His Panther, isolated after a failed attack, was surrounded by Soviet tanks that didn't immediately destroy him. Instead, they demonstrated their ability to kill him whenever they chose, firing shots that missed by inches, destroying terrain features around him, creating a display of dominance that shattered his crew's morale. When they finally surrendered, the Soviet commander explained in perfect German that destroying tanks was less valuable than destroying the myth of German invincibility. The logistics revolution enabled sustained Soviet operations that exhausted German forces. While Panthers and Tigers required extensive maintenance after every engagement, T-34s were operating continuously for weeks. Soviet maintenance battalions had evolved from chaotic repair efforts to assembly line efficiency. They pre-positioned spare parts based on statistical analysis of likely failures. They could rebuild destroyed tanks from salvaged components faster than Germany could ship new vehicles from factories. Intelligence from the Battle of Kiev in November revealed the culmination of Soviet tactical evolution. The 3rd Guards Tank Army executed a breakthrough operation that demonstrated mastery of every aspect of armored warfare. Reconnaissance units identified German positions with patient observation. Artillery, guided by forward observers and tanks, delivered precision strikes that eliminated key strong points. The main assault came in echelons, each wave with a specific objective. maintaining momentum despite German counterattacks. Exploitation forces poured through gaps before German reserves could react. It was blitzkrieg perfected, executed by the very army that had been its first victim. General Model's assessment was brutally honest. The Soviets had compressed 20 years of tactical development into 6 months. They had analyzed every German success from Poland to Kursk, extracted the underlying principles, and improved upon them. Where German doctrine emphasized rigid perfection, Soviet doctrine stressed adaptable effectiveness. Where Germans pursued tactical superiority through equipment quality, Soviet achieved it through tactical innovation. The apprentice hadn't just matched the master, they had revealed the master's limitations. The institutional learning capability proved most decisive. After each engagement, Soviet units conducted detailed after-action reviews, documenting lessons learned and distributing them across the entire front within days. German units, by contrast, hoarded tactical knowledge, with successful commanders keeping their methods secret to maintain personal advantage. The Soviets had socialized tactical excellence while Germans had individualized it, creating a learning differential that accelerated with each battle. Colonel Hartmann, evacuated after losing his left arm to a T-34 shell, wrote his final report from a hospital in Warsaw. He described facing an enemy that had evolved beyond recognition, transforming from the clumsy opponent of 1941 into a sophisticated force that had mastered every aspect of armored warfare. The technological gap still favored Germany. Panthers and Tigers remained superior to T-34s in direct comparison, but tactical evolution had rendered that advantage meaningless. The Soviets had learned to fight asymmetrically, using superior tactics to defeat superior machines. The December 1943 conference at Rassenburg revealed the depth of German crisis. Hitler, presented with evidence of Soviet tactical superiority, flew into denial, insisting that German racial superiority guaranteed eventual victory. But the Panzer generals knew better. They were watching the Red Army demonstrate that tactical excellence could be learned, systematized, and mass-produced. Every assumption about German military superiority was being demolished by T-34s manned by peasants who had become professional soldiers through systematic education. The final evidence came from radio intercepts of Soviet training schools. They were already developing counters to German tactics that hadn't been employed yet, anticipating the next evolution of panzer warfare and preparing responses. They had created a predictive model of German tactical development, staying ahead of innovations that German commanders were only beginning to consider. The student had become the teacher, and the teacher had no response. In his memoirs, written years after the war, Guderian would reflect on this period as the death of German tactical superiority. The Soviets hadn't defeated the Wehrmacht through material advantage or numerical superiority, though both contributed. They had won through intellectual evolution, transforming from tactical novices to masters in a span that defied military precedent. The Panzer force that had conquered Europe met its match not in Allied technology, but in Soviet learning capability. The story of post-Kursk tactical evolution remains one of military history's most dramatic transformations. An army that had been on the brink of collapse in 1941 had become, by late 1943, the most tactically sophisticated armored force in the world. They achieved this not through revolutionary technology or individual genius, but through systematic learning, institutional adaptation, and the willingness to abandon everything that didn't work while perfecting everything that did. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating exploration of how the Red Army transformed armored warfare after Kursk. This story reminds us that in warfare, the ability to learn and adapt often matters more than initial advantages. If you found this analysis compelling, please subscribe and share it with fellow military history enthusiasts. What other tactical evolutions from World War II would you like us to explore? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the greatest victories come not from superior weapons, but from superior learning. Until next time, keep discovering the hidden transformations that change history.